Welcome to the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, telling the unique stories that make up the diverse fabric of Pennsylvania.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast. I'm Sydney Harris, your host, and as always, I'm thrilled and deeply grateful to share more captivating stories from across Pennsylvania. If you visited our America 250 PA website or follow us on social media, you've likely seen our heartfelt efforts to honor Pennsylvania's veterans, an initiative we undertake with immense pride. As we celebrate 250 years, we recognize that none of this would be possible without the sacrifices of our dedicated service members. That's why, for both of our May episodes and in recognition of Memorial Day, we're taking a special step forward by inviting these brave men and women to share their personal stories right here on our podcast. Today, we're privileged to speak with Alysa Ambrose, a retired Navy captain, Andrew J. Tiernan, retired from the Army National Guard, and Patrick Rieder, a retired Air Force major. Join us to hear their stories of service firsthand. For today's Veteran Spotlight, I am truly honored to welcome Alysa Ambrose from Allegheny County. Alysa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So to begin, could you tell us what motivated you to serve in the military?
Well, I would say I'm no greater patriot than anybody else. My motivations were mostly financial. I wanted to go to college, and I was the oldest of 4 children, and my parents didn't necessarily have enough money saved up for all of us, especially not for me to go to the caliber of school that I wanted to go to. And the recruiters were calling my house and harassing my mother. I don't know how. I had taken an ASVAB test for some reason in high school, and I guess I had scored well on that. So recruiters were calling. And I made some flippant remark to somebody about, well, I'm planning to go to college, and unless you're offering free money, somebody said, well, we do offer this scholarship. So I said, well, great. Let me apply for that. So I applied for an ROTC scholarship and got it. And so that's how I ended up paying for college ultimately. And the payback commitment for the ROTC scholarship is service for 4 years following graduation. And that's what got my career started initially. And then, one thing led to another. And before you know it, I served for 25 years.
Wow, 25 years. That's incredible. And so I'm sure you had a journey across these decades. Could you tell us a little bit about your service story? What branch did you serve in? What roles did you undertake? Where were you stationed? And well, you already said how long your service was, 25 years.
Yeah, 25 years. So my scholarship was offered through the Marine Corps, which, fun fact, is technically part of the Department of the Navy. And back in those days, I won't tell you how old I am, but back in those days, there were not a lot of opportunities for women, especially not in the Marine Corps. And so I did my first year in ROTC and then did as a Marine option and did the summer midshipman training, which is a combined Navy and Marine Corps event. And I went to San Diego for that training, and you do like a week with the surface Navy and a week with the submarine Navy and a week with aviators flying stuff at various different opportunities and a week with the Marines. After the week with the Marines and saying, who's a Marine option? And this dumb girl raises her hand, and then realizing, gee, I'm not so sure I'm loving what I'm doing here as a Marine option. And then when I got back and realized what things I would be doing as a Marine after graduation and commissioning, I realized this is not really my dream assignment choices. And the opportunities for women in the Navy seemed a little more appealing to me. So I laterally transferred from Marine option to Navy option during my second year of college in ROTC. So I was commissioned into the Navy ultimately, and that's where I served. And in 1994, they lifted the combat exclusion for women. And so when I was commissioned in 1995, I went directly into surface warfare, driving ships in the Navy, fully into combatants. And so that's what I did. And I was stationed a little bit of everywhere. My first assignment was in San Diego, California, on a big deck amphib. And interestingly enough, or ironically enough, we transported Marines across the world. And so I did end up serving with Marines some, which, I could kind of speak their language, having done some of that with ROTC. After that, I did switch to the smaller destroyer Navy. So I did my 2 tours, 4 years payback for my ROTC scholarship, which at that point I could have transitioned out of the military if I wanted to, but I was kind of enjoying it. I mean, it was an adventure. I liked traveling the world, seeing lots of different countries, lots of different cultures. The work was challenging and interesting. So at the end of my 4-year commitment, the Navy offered me the opportunity to go to postgraduate school and get my master's degree in Monterey, California. And it just seemed like too good of an opportunity to pass up. Capitalizing on free education, because who can beat that? I went to Monterey, California for postgraduate school and got my master's degree. And again, because, the Navy's not stupid, there's a payback. So for a year and a half of schooling, the payback is 3 years, which was fine for me because it coincided with a department head bonus. So I had done my first tour in San Diego. My second tour was technically out of San Diego, but part of it was in Bath, Maine, because I was building a pre-commissioning destroyer from the keel up. I was part of the pre-commissioning crew of that destroyer, and we sailed it from Bath, Maine, down the eastern seaboard, through the Panama Canal, and back to San Diego. And then I transferred to Monterey for the postgraduate school. For the payback of that, did department head tours, and those tours were in Jacksonville, Florida, and deployed a couple of times from there. My deployments from the first ship from San Diego were across the Western Pacific to the Persian Gulf. My deployments from the ships in Jacksonville were across the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf. So I've literally gone the whole way around the world, just a little bit from this side, a little bit from that side. But either way, all points lead to the Middle East. And then after those tours, I did a tour at the Pentagon. I had my children on that shore duty. At that point, I was already beyond the halfway point, and I had already selected for command because things were going pretty successfully for me. And I thought, well, I'd be kind of dumb not to see this through to retirement now that I'm already halfway there. So I did shore duty at the Pentagon, worked on the Chief of Naval Operations staff, headquarters staff. I did my XO and CO, which that's second in command and commanding officer of a ship tour in Norfolk, Virginia. And then I went back to the Pentagon for my last tour and retired. So that's kind of the snapshot.
You retired a captain, correct?
I did, yeah. In the Navy, a captain is the same as a colonel in Air Force, Marines, and Army. But of course, the Navy has to be different.
That's incredible. And I do want to go back a little bit to when you talked about your work on combatants. You were among the first women to serve on these ships, a significant milestone. Could you share what this experience meant for you?
Well, it was interesting because in those days, specifically with just the first ship, it was kind of a very new thing. When I met my first ship, I met the ship in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, as they were coming home to San Diego from deployment. So it was like their last port visit. And that was the first deployment that ship had ever had women on. And so I saw just the tail end of kind of that very first. And then, clearly people were just getting used to the concept of serving with women. And a little bit throughout my tour, they were still getting used to the concept. And, it wasn't that many years past racial integration. And so, I definitely saw how, as a woman, it was interesting to see. Well, first of all, as an officer, my position was very different than potentially a lot of other people's perspectives were. But from my perspective as an officer, I had a lot of sailors that worked for me. But I definitely had interesting conversations with some of my African American sailors who said to me how interesting it was that when women showed up, that was the next thing that people were interested in talking about, the next difference. And when I was in command and we had our first transgender officer on board, at that point, like nobody cared that there were gay people on board anymore. And so having been kind of the test case for the next newest thing, it was really, as the CO, my job to set the tone. And so I said, we're absolutely not going to make any issue of this, because when you allow there to be any kind of discrimination for any kind of anybody, then it allows pervasive discrimination for other groups to keep festering. And so I feel like, I kind of did my little part there in making sure over the years, based on my experience of seeing how I was treated as a woman and seeing how some of my friends were treated when they were trying to be more public in their personas in different stages of integration. I'm really proud to see how the Navy has always been on the leading edge of those types of social conversations.
And for the young people thinking about a military career, do you have any advice to offer them?
I think the military is a great opportunity for people who are aimless. If you are conflicted and don't know what you want to do with yourself, it's a great opportunity to take the time and learn a skill or learn about yourself, or not waste your parents' money going to college when you don't have the first clue what you really want to do yet. You certainly get the opportunity to learn some leadership traits, to learn some responsibility, to see the world, to see other cultures, to see other people from around this country and experience diversity that maybe you don't have in your life from wherever you grew up. I think all of those things are great opportunities for people that maybe haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to other things. If you're in a lousy situation and need just a change of pace, I think the military is a great opportunity to just experience something different for a while. If you're not ready to jump into, a vocation or a college situation or whatever, to just take 4 or 6 years of an initial commitment and contribute to something more. It's an invaluable experience that even if you hate it, and even if you only do just one commitment, you'll have learned something about yourself and you'll have an experience of a lifetime that you'll always be able to talk about and always be able to have that kind of camaraderie. And there's no other experience that anybody else can have that is like the camaraderie in the military. Anywhere I've ever gone, if you say you're in the military and somebody else says they were in the military as well, it's like you have an immediate kinship and you have an immediate sense of understanding. And everybody else around you kind of has that same sense of understanding as well, that you will automatically be taken a little more seriously because other people know that you bring to your job, to your studies, to whatever organization you're in, that you will bring a different level of responsibility, seriousness, dependability, and those kind of immediate cred points are invaluable, that you kind of can't get that immediate positive respect from having done most anything else. And I think that that could serve you well doing anything else in the future if you have the opportunity to have served.
Alysa, that's all I have for you today, and it's been truly a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us, and above all, thank you for your service.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for talking with me.
Our next guest is York County's Patrick Rieder. Patrick, thank you so much for being here today and for your willingness to tell us your service story.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we like to start with asking our veterans why they served. Could you tell us why you decided to serve?
Oh gosh, I wish I had a great patriotic story, but it actually all started when I started off at after I graduated high school. I went to Penn State, and I realized that I just wasn't ready for college life at that time. I lacked self-discipline and just wasn't ready. And I had a friend of mine who had joined the Air Force. He had talked to me one day about, maybe that was something I should look into. Went to a recruiter, I think even that same week after I talked to a friend of mine. And I think I may have signed the paperwork, that day or a couple days later. And I had initially enlisted in the Air Force. I was ready to go.
And after you enlisted, what happened? Could you tell us a little bit about your service story? For example, where you were stationed, how long you were in service, and more?
Yeah, I kind of had a little bit of a unique background. After enlisting, didn't spend a lot of time before I was sent to basic training like all Air Force enlisted. Went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, where I did my basic training. And initially, I was in security forces, which is the Air Force equivalent of military police. Was trained as a police officer. After completing the police academy, was stationed at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware, not that far from home. Spent probably about 4 years at Dover Air Force Base. And while I was at Dover, actually went back to college and completed my undergrad degree. And right after that, I actually got out first time out of the Air Force, so I could actually went into the reserves so I could attend law school. I got accepted to law school at Widener Law School in Delaware, and but stayed in the reserves, and then actually switched to the Pennsylvania Air National Guard. So I never had a break in service while I completed my law degree. So I did my reserve time at Dover, at McGuire, and then at Willow Grove Naval Air Station up in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. And then when I graduated law school in 1999, I was a staff sergeant in the security forces. And as soon as I passed the bar exam, I got accepted into the Air Force JAG Corps. One day I was a staff sergeant, and the next day I was a first lieutenant. Got my commission as a JAG officer, as a first lieutenant. And then from there, I went to my first JAG assignment, which is an attorney in the Air Force. Went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where I was a prosecutor, and then I was a criminal defense attorney at Wright-Patterson. Was there for about 4 years. Then actually went to McGuire Air Force Base after that for a couple of years, and then I was lucky enough to get picked up to teach at the Air Force Academy out in Colorado Springs. And I stayed out there until my retirement in 1999. Or I'm sorry, 2009. Sorry.
No worries. And so during that time that you spent in the Air Force and as an attorney in the Air Force, what did your service mean to you?
Oh, man, everything. I really kind of wanted to continue to serve. There's some circumstances a little bit out of my control, family-wise, that it was time to go after almost 23 years. It was time for me to move on and do other things. But yeah, I loved every minute of it. I grew up in Philadelphia, was sort of lost in high school, didn't have, a lot of direction, didn't do well in high school, just barely made it into college, just didn't have a whole lot of direction. The Air Force gave me enough direction to straighten me up, get my undergrad and my law degree done. And, like I said, it basically gave me, everything I needed to succeed in life. So I basically owe everything I have to my service.
And after 23 years, what was the transition from service to civilian life like for you? Are there organizations or communities that helped you after your service ended?
Not initially. I think like all veterans, it's a tough transition. You're a little lost after you get out. I think the military does their best, and I think they're always trying to improve and find ways to improve the process. It's a tough transition. I'm just not sure they're ever going to get it right. It's just one of those things. And I was definitely lost probably for a number of years. I think the thing that helped me most is I was able to find, believe it or not, I play ice hockey. And I found an organization of disabled veteran hockey called the Philadelphia Flower Warriors, all military, all branches of service, sort of all like-minded, sort of looking for that, that military family connection. I think once I found them after a couple of years of being out, I think that was the biggest help I had, post-retirement, to kind of help me transition into that civilian life.
That is so amazing. I didn't even know that groups like that existed, and I'm so happy that it was able to make your transition complete or easier at least. Patrick, I deeply appreciate you taking the time today to share your experience with us. Thank you for your service to our country and for helping us understand more about the lives of those who serve.
Appreciate the invite.
Thank you again. For our final Veteran Spotlight of the day, I'm pleased to welcome Wayne County's Andrew J. Tiernan. Andrew, it's an honor to speak with you.
And thank you for having me.
So we like to start off by asking our veterans why they chose to serve. Could you share with us your reasons for joining the Army?
Yes, certainly. And the first part was, it's actually a twofold thing. First was the family history that I had. A lot of my relatives, my grandfather, great-grandfather, uncle, aunt had all served. So there was a family history in military service. But the second, and probably the one that leaned in on me the furthest and made me actually select military service, was I didn't really have a solid goal post high school. So, I was one of those kids that would just barely do enough homework. I wasn't really worried about what I was going to do post high school. And before I had realized it, I'd already gotten myself in a situation where I couldn't apply for scholarships or anything like that. So it felt like a good, at least a stopover, if nothing else, post high school. So that lack of a solid goal, as well as a family history, pulled me that direction.
So what is your service journey? For example, what was your role? Where were you stationed? And how long did you serve?
I actually served just under 22 years total service. Part of that being active, part of that being part-time in the National Guard. And I have a very long journey that I went through in my military career. It started in 91. 2 weeks after graduation, I went to basic training, and I'd gone in as what we call an 11 X-ray contract. I was an airborne light infantryman with initial Ranger contract to go to the Ranger Regiment and serve there. When I was at Benning and then eventually went to Bragg in the first couple of years of my service, Panama was, and everybody remembers Desert Storm, but most of the people that I was serving with in those two locations for the first 4 years of my service, Panama was the last combat service that a lot of them had remembered. A lot of them had been involved in Desert Storm and Desert Shield. However, Panama was those units' bread and butter because a lot of them were special operations and conventional operations airborne units, and that was their big thing. So that's what was bred into me initially were small unit tactics and jungle warfare, and that's what we did a lot. And we trained a lot for airfield seizures, raids. But really, the only real-world missions that came down those pipes in this first couple of years were all security and peacekeeping missions. Missions like ESAF with the El Salvadorian Augmentation Force and stuff like that. I had a jump accident when I was at Fort Bragg, and that really put a turning point in my career where I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. I fought to stay in the service because at that point I didn't know anything else. I was still kind of young, and I fought to stay in, and I had to change jobs. And the only job that was open to me was something that is barely known in the Army, and that's traffic management. So I took that job, which is a combat service support job. And little did I know, after I moved locations from, at that point, Bragg, and this was halfway through my first portion of my military career. So 4 years in, I had been exposed to this combat service support role. However, it was in a small detachment, and we deployed a lot. We went to Africa. We were in the Middle East quite often. We went to Europe to do some exercises there, as well as Southeast Asia. So I got to travel a lot, was in and around areas of operations where it was, we might be supporting a 12-man ODA to do a mission, or we might be supporting an entire brigade to do a training exercise like Bright Star. So got to travel a lot, and being part of those small detachments really got me interested in medicine and wanted to be a combat medic, even after I had my jump accident. But I had injuries that were not conducive to me doing that job. I had a lot of restrictions. So I had to take that traffic management coordinator job. But being in that small team, we had to be really self-reliant. We deployed a lot, anywhere from 5 to 12 of us to do non-combat operations in sometimes combat zones and stuff. And we didn't have a lot of internal support or external support in things like communications, information technology, or even medical support. So a lot of us had to learn how to be a jack of all trades and learn IT, learn satellite communication stuff, as well as the regular radio communication stuff. If one of us got hurt, a lot of times have to depend on each other until we were done with the operation, and then we could evac somebody back to launch stool or someplace where they could get American treatment versus using third country national treatment. We had to become self-reliant. That got me a contracting job, and I did that for a couple of years, and that was surprisingly nothing like what I did the last even 15 years of my life, because I was a senior systems analyst for Department of Defense, and we supported the detachments that I mentioned being part of. So where we didn't have that external support to do these things when we're deployed, I became a contractor in a new position to go out and provide this support to those teams, which, really opened my eyes to the way that the entire Department of Defense works. Shortly after that was a big break in service, about 3 years. I had gotten out for the contracting job and moved back to Pennsylvania. After I moved back up to Pennsylvania, I missed that military structure, and being trained as a airborne light infantryman, I had attended an EMT class down in North Carolina, was very interested in that. I started volunteering with the local fire department here almost immediately when I moved back and redid my EMT training, but I still missed that military structure. So I decided to go back in the National Guard, a local unit here in Honesdale. I'd been working on my physical injuries, been doing my own physical therapy, and got myself back to the shape that I needed to be in. So when I went in the National Guard, I could go back to being an infantryman again. It just so happened that infantry unit that I joined here in Honesdale, a local one, and a medic slot had opened up. So I decided, I'm already a civilian EMT. They let me reclass, and I became a medic. Mind you, while all this was going on, 9/11 had happened. And while I was in medic school, they said, hey, when you get back, we're hearing rumors that your unit's deploying. And we're all like, oh, crap, we're going to Afghanistan. Well, just to come back and find out that, no, we're going to go do peacekeeping mission, S4 mission in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So sort of a letdown for somebody who wanted to do combat operations. But doing that, I got to get a lot of exposure. I got re-exposed to the special operations world because we got to do a lot of work. I got assigned to being a medic for what was originally our division QRF, but turned into a little bit more than that because we started working with a National Guard ODA, Special Forces unit out of Baltimore, and got to learn a lot, got to see a lot of how small unit operations works and special operations, being re-exposed to that was great. Even more so, the team daddy, that's the term that's used for the senior NCO on the team, that Sergeant Major happened to be his primary MOS originally was 18 Delta. He was a Special Forces medic. And I bothered him and wanted to learn everything I could about operational medicine from him, because I had started getting my interest peaked back up because I was doing it as a civilian at that point. I wanted to be him, so I tried learning as much as I could from him. Well, that ODA got pulled out to go to another theater operations, and we took over their special operations mission. So we got to be part of that, call ourselves the Secret Squirrel guys. But then we came back, and I was working full-time as a civilian, as an EMT, and then eventually a critical care EMT, and continued schooling and became a paramedic and worked as a civilian paramedic until we found out we were getting deployed to Iraq. And the op tempo for our National Guard unit, specifically our battalion, had been so high because we had been sending people to cover missions in Afghanistan, Iraq. So our op tempo had really increased a lot. And, I used to think of the National Guard as the nasty guard. And once I saw the other side of that fence, just like seeing the other side of the fence in my initial active duty time with combat service support and becoming a traffic management guy was a huge, across the spectrum change from being an infantryman. I got to see the benefits of being a National Guard at that point. And when we deployed to Iraq, I actually requested to go as an infantryman versus a medic, and that was approved because of my experience as an infantryman and my real world experience as infantry on the active duty side, working in some good units. Once we were in Iraq, I eventually had been put in a squad leader position, but we did a lot of small unit stuff, so I got to do a lot of the medical stuff, and I knew everybody in our medical platoon that was supporting us, so we'd go back and forth, and they'd ask me questions about certain things. Had a lot of exposure to some combat-related injuries, and especially on the Iraqi National Guardsmen's side, when they got into conflict, sometimes we were the first ones to get on scene to support them. So when I came back from that deployment, I actually had become more interested in doing more deployments, but a active duty guard position came open in our battalion, and it was one of the first ones that was going to be a medical position for medical readiness NCO. And I decided, I'm working as a civilian paramedic, but I missed that military structure, and I'm going to take that AGR position. So I went full-time in the National Guard. My day-to-day job was case management, ensuring everybody was prepped for deployments, because our op tempo, we were sending people all over the place. Op tempo was so high, as well as getting involved in deployments myself and training up for that. And part-time, I had transitioned to being a flight paramedic. And mind you, all this time, I'm still volunteering with the fire department. And because of being active Guard Reserve, actually wrote a letter to the Adjutant General of Pennsylvania to get approved, officially approved, to do moonlighting work or working a civilian job as an active duty soldier. And I expressed that, me working as a civilian flight paramedic can only help me provide better treatment to my military counterparts when we're doing active operations. And it wasn't me making up a story. It actually, I think, helped out a lot. And while in that position, I actually fought for one of the programs in the Army. It used to be you call for an Army medevac and you might get an EMT level provider, you might get an advanced EMT level provider, you might get a paramedic. It all depended on the unit. I've part of the discussions to get it set in stone that all Army flight medics had to be trained at the same level as civilian flight paramedics, and that went through. And it's actually policy now. You can't be a flight medic without being a paramedic in the Army anymore. During that time frame, I started having some medical issues, and sort of some of the stuff from my jump accident had come back, and I started having some more serious medical issues, losing feeling in certain extremities and stuff. And I eventually had to get out. And at that point, I ended up retiring, and it was a medical retirement, but I had 21 years and 8 months in. And active duty time, I had about 18 years active duty experience already at that point. That basically was my military road and my military journey. Sorry that was so long, but that's
quite the journey. It sounds like to me you're a man that cannot sit still, but one that cares about his country and cares about the people, and to be trained in all of the rules that you were trained in.
I still volunteer with the fire department here locally. I'm actually the EMS captain, and we stood up a EMS association at the county level, and I'm the president for that, as well as we took in 3 foster kids. So,
wow,
stay busy.
That's incredible. And so through your journey, you've obviously met so many people and been to so many places. I'm sure Memorial Day holds a special significance for you, and you might actually have a unique perspective on it. What does Memorial Day mean to you, and how do you think that we as civilians and people within Pennsylvania can honor and support our veterans?
And you're absolutely correct. Memorial Day, and I don't tend to get very emotional. I hold it back a lot, but legacy is the first thing that I think of, and a lot of the soldiers that came before me, and a lot of the soldiers that I've been exposed to. In fact, early in my career, I met a kid that I went through RIP with, Ranger Indoctrination Program. I left Fort Benning before the Battle of Mogadishu happened, and they got deployed there. I was at Bragg when they went there, and he died there. And that's one of the first memories that pops in my head for Memorial Day, knowing that. And the benefit, as bad as that sounds, the benefit that some of especially in today's world with the global war on terrorism, we mourn our fallen, and there's a lot of legacy we try to stand up for and remember. But there's a lot that I have learned in my military and civilian medical career that has benefited from them as well. For instance, that individual I mentioned that died at the Battle of Mogadishu, a white paper came out in 1996 teaching us how to treat combat fatalities and trauma fatalities better. A lot of what we do in the civilian and medical world, or civilian medical and the military medical world now, is because of him dying in that battle. I had a lot of friends that I had become close to pre-deployment when we went to Iraq, and we lost quite a few soldiers out of our battalion in Iraq. Some of them I worked with in Bosnia-Herzegovina right before we went to Iraq, and their memories pop up in my head. Probably the one that pops up the most is not even a combat-related fatality, but was a self-inflicted wound, a suicide. I worked with him from the point that he came in the National Guard until the day before he died. And his brother, actually his twin brother, goes around doing motivational speeches based on what he's learned from his brother dying by his own hands. And they actually did a presentation at the White House Memorial Day presentation quite a few years ago. And he was the subject of that presentation. Thinking about not only the people before me that have fallen on the battlefield, but also the suicides that have resulted from the trauma they've been exposed to, either directly or indirectly, and the stress that has been put on a lot of these younger soldiers as they were coming up through. Without understanding exactly how much stress there was until it was too late for some of them.
It has truly been wonderful speaking with you today, Andrew. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us about your journey and your story and what Memorial Day means to you and to so many people. And of course, we do want to thank you so much for your service. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me talk about it.
I hope you've enjoyed listening and learning from today's veterans as much as I have. To Alysa, Patrick, and Andrew, I extend my deepest gratitude for your willingness to share your stories of service with us today. Your courage and commitment to duty is an inspiration to us all. To all of our Pennsylvania veterans and service members, thank you for your service. You are the reason why we celebrate 250 years of our nation and our Commonwealth. As we approach Memorial Day, I encourage all of us to not only reflect on the sacrifices made by our veterans, but also affirm our commitment to supporting them in every way we can, whether it's through acts of kindness or taking the time to listen to their stories. Let us ensure that our gratitude extends far beyond this holiday. Join us for our next episode where we will continue to highlight our veterans, their services, their stories, and their sacrifices. Until then, stay PA proud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Coleman, Executive Director of America 250 PA. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. We encourage you to learn more about America 250 PA and send us your podcast ideas at america250pa.org.
This has been the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, produced by Commonwealth Media Services. Stay tuned for more epic Pennsylvania stories at america250pa.org.